Hi there, my name is Adam Scott. I'm the designer of RPG Club. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the morality of characters in Sword and Sorcery. Specifically, we're going to reference Robert E. Howard's characters, Conan Kull, and the Solomon Kane, the Cavalier Zealot. So what I want to discuss is that these three characters have really strong moral codes, and that these might be different from stories we're typically used to in, say, like the high fantasy or epic fantasy genre. And they resonate so strongly with me, and I want to share them with you so you have an idea either how to enjoy different types of works of fiction, or if you're involved in role playing and storytelling, how you might be able to recreate those types of characters through your gameplay or facilitation if you're a dungeon master. So let's just go one after the next. The first character we're going to look at is Conan. And so Conan is he's actually not my favorite Robert E. Howard character, but he's probably the most iconic. So let's start with him. Conan is a very individualistic character. He is pragmatic. He values honor and loyalty. He believes in this idea typically in all his stories, and that's why I think what makes Conan such kind of a badass in all his stories is this concept of might makes right and strength shall prevail. And it also makes for really exciting, engaging storytelling. Conan also has traits of an anti-hero. He has a rough exterior, and he doesn't look like a typical hero. Now, the thing that makes Conan interesting for me as somebody who enjoys sword and sorcery fiction is the fact that he has his own moral code. Now, in a previous video, and this is the reason I'm actually making this one, I mentioned, and I didn't realize I said it, that sword and sorcery characters are amoral. And I was trying to contrast that with the really stringent morality found in epic high fantasy. But I had several viewers say, "You're totally wrong." And I looked at it and I thought about it. I was like, "You're right. I don't think I either meant to say that or I didn't think about it carefully enough." Because the thing that I love about Conan and most of Howard's characters is they're so complex and they have their own moral compass to which they rigidly adhere to, but it's maybe not societally accepted. So let's go into the next one here. Let's talk about Kull. Kull is actually my favorite Robert E. Howard character, and it's because he's philosophical and he is reflective. He's become the king of Atlantis almost reluctantly, and in all the stories that Kull is present in, he seems just like there's a weight that weighs upon him in this burden of leadership that he is struggling to overcome. He feels alienated, and he is a king of a civilization that is not his own. So there's this distance he feels between his job of being a leader and maybe who he is as a person. Now, Cole is also somebody like Conan who believes that strength and might will prevail in the context of storytelling, but it comes from he's much more reflective as opposed to reactive. Conan is a very action-oriented character. Kull, there are scenes of Kull consulting with different counselors and different advisors throughout all of his stories. And while ultimately most of those stories end up in action-oriented adventures, which I think are awesome, it's not as simple as the Conan tales, which typically are set the plot up, move the action, a lot of cool stuff happens, and then we resolve the story. So Kull is also on this quest for truth. He's driven by this desire to understand, and I would say he's probably the most intellectual of the three that we're talking about today. He's very, even though he's physically a barbarian, and I think in many ways he's a precursor to Conan as a character, he is definitely different. And reading Kull will feel very different than reading Conan storytelling, because his moral compass, which he adheres to strongly, which is also not necessarily the morality of his society, because he's alienated, because he came from a different civilization, or as he came in from a barbarian civilization. He's struggling to adhere to that. And that, I think, is what makes him so interesting. Lastly, of the three today, Solomon Kane. I really enjoy Solomon Kane's stories. I've read them twice. I think I've read many of them 3 times. The volume from Robert E. Howard. And I'll link all the stuff below if you're interested, because I know a lot of people have expressed, hey, where can I read this awesome fiction? Solomon Kane is a religious zealot. I think some of his stories even kind of move into the horror type genre and the surreal. But he's a religious zealot. He is puritanical in his zeal. So he knows exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to purge evil from the world, purge evil spirits from the world, and he knows exactly what he stands for. And I think the thing that I want to emphasize with these three characters is they all know what they stand for, and in many cases, what they stand for is in opposition, or at least highly contrasted, with the predominant society in which they live. And that to me is one of the keys to the morality we find in sword and sorcery. Individuals in these stories have their own moral code of honor. They have their own set of values to which they adhere very strongly. But often those values are very different than the prevailing culture. And I think personally that conflict is very interesting. Let me expand a little bit more on Solomon Kane, and then we can talk about how to use these ideas in your storytelling if you're involved in Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing hobbies. So Solomon Kane, he's very stoic in how he approaches things. He has kind of this drive, this determination, which if you're going to use a character for a Dungeons and Dragons game, I think can be an interesting approach to have very kind of a plotting, straightforward approach. Solomon Kane is self-sacrificing. He's willing to set his own well-being aside. I think to some degree Conan does that as well, and Kull, but Solomon Kane is very much, he elevates that in terms of his character. And he is also isolated. I think that's a very common theme between both Solomon Kane and Kull, and that they're isolated in many of their stories. They're individuals. They're kind of set apart from others. So how can you use this as a bonus in your storytelling, whether you're a dungeon master, game master, or player? Setting up these character traits as defining approaches can help you have a feel that is similar to a sword and sorcery style of fiction. And so if you enjoy the sword and sorcery genre, and I know many players do, many enthusiasts of the sword and sorcery genre enjoy those stories, and many people have asked me, how do I bring that into the Dungeons and Dragons space? Because I personally feel, and you can disagree with me if you want, but I personally feel that a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stories tend to either rehash the Lord of the Rings, or they like to rehash any of the popular media that's currently available, with things like Critical Role or the Dungeons and Dragons movie, or more recently Dimension 20. So they rehash those types of stories. People mimic those stories. The sword and sorcery genre is not as well known, and therefore those stories are not as often seen. So if you want to emulate these qualities of having a strong moral code, which sets in contrast to society, the key is, if you're a GM, from my point of view, a dungeon master, is to make sure that the character still has an orientation that allows them to support the other players, and to not necessarily work towards just their own goals they're trying to achieve. So that the character needs a reason to support and work with the party. If the character is too isolated, like a Solomon Kane type figure, exclusively where they're just running around doing their own thing, that can actually degrade the quality of the experience. One idea is, as a game master, if you want to introduce some of that flavor to your storytelling, introduce an NPC. And I actually have introduced an NPC very similar to Solomon Kane in my own games. It was one of the best role-playing experiences I had, having a character with that type of redemption arc where Solomon Kane is going through trying to purge his soul and purge the world of different dark forces. So you can use your NPCs strategically if you're a game master to try to introduce those themes without forcing it upon the party and their individual characters. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know how I can help. If you're trying to play more D&D or tabletop role-playing, take a look at the link in our bio. We have helped thousands of people find and play great, awesome sessions. My name's Adam Scott. If you feel that this helped you or it could help someone else, like, subscribe, share. It kicks it out to more people, and we're just trying to help people. I look forward to seeing you again next time.